Have you ever noticed how much of your life is spent avoiding discomfort? How often you bite your tongue, nod along, or fake a laugh just to keep things smooth? Think about the last time someone said something that unsettled you. Maybe it was a colleague making an offhand comment, a friend crossing a line, or a partner subtly dismissing your feelings. And what did you do? Chances are you let it slide. Told yourself it wasn't worth the trouble, that keeping the peace mattered more. We tell ourselves this lie all the time. It's not a big deal. I'll let it go. It's better to avoid the drama. And so, slowly, day by day, we make ourselves smaller. We compromise on tiny things. The seat we didn't want to take, the opinion we didn't voice, the boundary we didn't enforce. We convince ourselves we're being mature, wise, diplomatic. But beneath that mask of composure lies something far more dangerous. A quiet, gnawing sense of betrayal. Not betrayal by others, betrayal of ourselves. And the cost of that betrayal isn't immediate. It doesn't erupt in some cinematic breakdown. No, it's subtle, cumulative, corrosive. It shows up in the restlessness you can't name, in the way you avoid mirrors, in the weight that presses on your chest when you realize the people closest to you don't really know you at all, because you've only ever shown them a version you thought they could accept. Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher both admired and feared for his brutal honesty, would tell you this is no small thing. He believed that one of the greatest sicknesses of modern life is not war or disease, but the fear of conflict, the quiet, insidious habit of trading truth for comfort. And the tragedy of it is this: you will never be free while you are afraid of being disliked, misunderstood, or disagreed with. Because to live authentically is to invite conflict. It is to hold your ground, risk offense, and confront the unbearable possibility that not everyone will approve of who you are when you stop pretending. Nietzsche's philosophy was, at its core, a relentless call to face the things we've been taught to avoid. Not just external conflicts, arguments, disagreements, public battles, but internal ones. The war between who you are and who you've been told to be. The tension between your instincts and your conditioning. He saw this conflict not as a problem, but as the very engine of personal evolution. And yet, from the time we are children, most of us are taught the opposite. We're told that good people get along, that it's better to be agreeable than assertive, that politeness is a virtue and confrontation is a vice. We learn to smooth over our discomfort, to minimize our own needs, to adopt the opinions of the room we're standing in. And in doing so, we unknowingly participate in our own erasure. Imagine for a moment a society where no one spoke up when something was wrong, where no one challenged authority, questioned tradition, or disrupted the status quo. It sounds unthinkable. And yet many of us replicate this dynamic in our own lives every single day. In the conversations we avoid, in the relationships we endure, in the opinions we swallow because they might be too much. Nietzsche warned of this tendency, calling it a form of spiritual cowardice. He believed that avoiding conflict is not an act of peacekeeping, but of self-betrayal. That every time you say yes when you mean no, every time you choose silence over honesty, you lose a piece of yourself. And the cumulative effect of these tiny betrayals is a life lived for others, defined by other people's expectations, stripped of authenticity. This video is about that fear, about the quiet tyranny of conflict avoidance and the way it shapes not only our personal lives but our culture. It's about what happens when you finally realize that the peace you've preserved is a prison of your own making. And it's about why Nietzsche would tell you, without hesitation, that if you want to be free, you must stop being afraid of conflict. Over the next few minutes, we're going to unravel this idea. We'll explore Nietzsche's philosophy of will, of strength, and of the vital role conflict plays in personal freedom. We'll talk about why avoiding conflict isn't kindness, but cowardice. Why choosing comfort over truth kills your spirit. and why the people who seem fearless, unapologetic, and alive aren't reckless. They've simply stopped caring about being liked. By the end of this, you'll be faced with a choice: to continue living inside the careful, tidy narrative you've constructed, or to risk the beautiful, terrifying freedom that comes from embracing the inevitable conflicts of an honest life. So, let me ask you this. When was the last time you said exactly what you meant? When was the last time you let the silence fall after an unpopular truth? When was the last time you stood up for yourself, not in anger, but in clear, unapologetic defiance? If you can't remember, it's not because you haven't had the opportunity. It's because you've been too well trained to avoid it. And Nietzsche would say, it's time to unlearn that training. This is where it begins. Friedrich Nietzsche was not interested in comforting people. He wasn't trying to soothe your anxieties or offer gentle advice about self-care. He was far more dangerous than that. He wanted to tear through the illusions you've built your life around, illusions of morality, of comfort, of social harmony, and force you to look at the raw, unfiltered chaos underneath. Not because he wanted to cause suffering, but because he believed that freedom, real freedom, demands conflict. It demands confrontation, not only with the world, but with yourself. At the heart of Nietzsche's philosophy is the concept of the will to power. This is often misunderstood as a thirst for domination or control. But Nietzsche didn't mean power in the political or social sense. He meant something far more existential, the internal force that drives a person to become more than what they are. It is the inner spark that pushes you to grow, to challenge, to confront, to overcome. And conflict is not just a side effect of this process, it's the engine. According to Nietzsche, everything that truly matters, authenticity, freedom, greatness, comes not through harmony, but through struggle. He once wrote, "You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star." And by chaos, he didn't mean emotional instability or reckless behavior. He meant the willingness to engage in the internal and external battles that shape your identity. But here's the problem. Most people are terrified of that chaos. We've been conditioned to equate conflict with danger, disagreement with disrespect, and assertion with arrogance. So we play small. We become agreeable. We pretend we don't mind being overlooked, stepped on, silenced, and slowly, we drift further from ourselves. Nietzsche saw this phenomenon as a kind of spiritual decay, a decline into what he called the last man. The last man is the person who avoids conflict at all costs, who seeks comfort, safety, predictability, who would rather be liked than be honest. The last man believes that peace is the highest virtue, even if it means silencing his own instincts, passions, and truths. This, Nietzsche believed, is the death of freedom. Because when you kill conflict, you kill growth. And when you kill growth, you are no longer living, you are merely surviving. To Nietzsche, true freedom is not about being left alone. It's not about luxury, relaxation, or even happiness. It's about the capacity to live according to your own inner law, your own values, and that requires the strength to endure opposition, the strength to say no, the strength to be misunderstood, rejected, even hated, because that's the price of authenticity. Conflict, then, is not the enemy. It's the test, the crucible in which your true self is forged. But Nietzsche didn't just theorize this. He lived it. He spent his life being misunderstood, ridiculed, and rejected by the intellectual elite of his time. His books sold poorly. His relationships deteriorated. His mental health collapsed. And yet through all of that, he never stopped writing, never stopped questioning, never stopped confronting the uncomfortable truths he believed the world needed to face. And today, long after his death, he is remembered not for being agreeable, but for being dangerous, for being willing to say the things others were too afraid to even think. In our modern world, where conflict is often treated as a failure of emotional intelligence or a breakdown of civility, Nietzsche's message is a warning. if you live your life avoiding friction, avoiding disagreement, avoiding the deep discomfort that comes from standing alone, then you may be alive, but you are not free. Because freedom does not mean the absence of struggle. It means the presence of strength, the strength to engage in the struggle that matters. And here's where the uncomfortable truth reveals itself. The part most people will instinctively want to reject. We've been told all our lives that peace is the ultimate good, that harmony is the sign of maturity, that avoiding conflict is the mark of wisdom. We've been conditioned to see confrontation as dangerous, to shrink ourselves for the sake of keeping the waters calm, to call it kindness when in reality it's cowardice. And yet, this seemingly virtuous avoidance is the very thing that enslaves us. Nietzsche's revelation is brutal in its honesty. The avoidance of conflict is not a virtue. It's a slow death. The moment you prioritize peace over truth, you sever yourself from your own vitality. You become the person who nods in conversations you disagree with, who tolerates injustices to avoid discomfort, who silences your instincts so you won't disturb the peace. And over time, a strange thing happens. You stop recognizing your own reflection. You no longer know what you believe, what you desire, what you are capable of. You've traded your inner law for external approval. And here's the paradox. The more you avoid conflict, the more conflict controls you. Not externally, but internally. Resentments build, boundaries erode, regret festers. And though you might keep your voice soft and your movements small, your spirit is at war with itself. Because deep down, the self knows when it's been betrayed. This is the sickness Nietzsche diagnosed in modern humanity, what he called herd morality. A morality designed not to elevate the strong, the creative, or the courageous, but to pacify the masses, to reward conformity, obedience, docility. It's a morality that teaches you to be good by being quiet, to be virtuous by being agreeable, to be worthy by being harmless. But Nietzsche warns us, there is no freedom in harmlessness. A person who cannot say no, who cannot endure being disliked, who cannot weather the loneliness of standing apart, that person is not free. They are a captive dressed in courtesy. The real freedom, he tells us, lies in the individual who can embrace conflict as an essential part of life, who sees struggle not as a threat, but as a forge, who understands that you cannot shape your character, your destiny, your soul, without first enduring the fire. It is not the absence of friction that makes life meaningful, but the strength to move through it. To claim your life as your own, you must be willing to be opposed, willing to be disliked, willing to lose battles for the sake of winning yourself. And this is where most people flinch, because the price of freedom isn't cheap. It demands you confront not only the world, but every lie you've told yourself to avoid discomfort. And if you refuse, you may live peacefully, but you'll never truly be alive. So what now? After all this unsettling truth, after dismantling the comforting, illusions about peace, about kindness, about harmony, what are you supposed to do with it? It's one thing to recognize the trap you're in. It's another thing entirely to find the strength to crawl out of it. Nietzsche never promised ease. He didn't offer 7 steps to happiness or 5 tricks to get people to like you. What he offered was harder, but far more honest. He offered you your life back, but only if you're willing to pay the price. So let's talk about what that price looks like. The first step is reframing your relationship with conflict. Understand this. Conflict is not failure. Disagreement is not disrespect. Opposition is not oppression. They are signs that you are alive, thinking and moving through a world that is not designed for individuality. The absence of friction doesn't mean you've found peace. It means you've disappeared. Start small. When you catch yourself agreeing just to avoid discomfort, pause. When you feel the urge to soften your truth so you won't offend, resist it. When a boundary is crossed and your instinct is to stay silent, speak. Not because you owe the world your outrage, but because you owe yourself your voice. This isn't about becoming combative. It's about becoming honest. About daring to occupy your full weight in the world without apology. Second, and this is crucial, you must learn to tolerate being misunderstood. One of the deepest fears that keeps people trapped in herd morality is the terror of being seen as difficult, arrogant, selfish, or strange. Nietzsche believed that to be free, you must be willing to endure the loneliness of the path less traveled. You must make peace with the reality that not everyone will approve of you. Not everyone should. And perhaps that's the hardest battle of all. Not the conflict with others, but the conflict within yourself. The part of you desperate for belonging will resist. It will beg you to shrink, to explain, to soften. And you must learn to hold your ground even when it hurts. Third, cultivate what Nietzsche called the higher self. This isn't a spiritual abstraction. It's the part of you capable of rising above petty anxieties, above the need for constant approval, and living by your own code. It demands discipline, reflection, brutal self-honesty. It means asking yourself not, what will they think, but is this true to me? It means turning down the volume of the crowd and listening, sometimes for the first time, to the sound of your own soul. And here's the paradox Nietzsche understood. The more you reclaim your voice, your will, your power, the less conflict you'll fear. Because you'll realize that conflict was never the thing threatening your peace. It was your fear of it. And once you cross that threshold, you'll experience a kind of freedom no approval, no agreement, no status quo could ever offer. A life. That is yours. Now I want you to reflect on this for a moment. How many of your decisions, big or small, have been shaped not by what you truly want, but by what you thought would keep the peace? How many times have you swallowed your truth to avoid being too much? How many years have you spent being agreeable when what you really needed was to be free? It's a sobering inventory. But it's not too late. You can start now. Choose one place in your life where you've been hiding. One conversation you've avoided. One truth you've dulled. And speak it. Not with aggression, not with cruelty, but with clarity. Because if Nietzsche taught us anything, it's that the only life worth living is the one claimed by force of will, not inherited through quiet compliance. And now I'll leave you with a question, one that I hope you'll answer not just in the comments, but in your own life. When was the last time you said what you truly believed, knowing it might cost you approval? And what would your life look like if you started doing it now? Let me know your thoughts below. Do you avoid conflict? Do you crave peace, even at the cost of your own voice? Or have you begun to reclaim that dangerous, beautiful thing called your truth? If this video challenged you, if it woke something up inside you, if it made you a little uncomfortable in the best possible way, subscribe, like, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because in a world that rewards silence, even a single voice of defiance can start a fire, and maybe it'll be yours. Have you ever noticed how often we say, "I just don't want any drama," or how quickly we label someone as toxic the moment they challenge our worldview? Somewhere along the way, conflict became synonymous with danger, a thing to be avoided, smoothed over, silenced. We were told good people don't fight, mature, people rise above, and strong people turn the other cheek. But what if that isn't strength at all? Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher so many feared and misunderstood, argued that our obsession with avoiding conflict is the very thing that robs us of our vitality, our creativity, and our freedom. In his words, the snake, which cannot cast, its skin has to die. What he meant is simple: to grow, to evolve, to become ourselves. We must be willing to confront, shed, and fight when necessary. Let's unpack this. At the core of Nietzsche's philosophy lies a concept known as the will to power. not power in the crude, tyrannical sense, but as an innate, life-affirming force inside every living thing, the drive to express, to expand, to shape the world according to one's values. This isn't about domination over others, but mastery over oneself. Conflict, Nietzsche believed, is the natural arena for this will to be tested and refined. When you avoid conflict, you deny yourself this trial. You become stagnant, comfortable, and though you may look peaceful on the outside, inside, you're decaying. Think about it. The colleague who takes credit for your work, the friend who oversteps your boundaries, the relationship where you keep tolerating what unsettles you. Each time you choose silence over confrontation, you hand over a piece of your will. Not because the other person is stronger, but because your fear of friction is greater than your desire for freedom. Nietzsche traced this tendency back to what he called slave morality. Societies, especially religious or highly structured ones, often teach people that submission is virtue, that the meek shall inherit the earth, that turning the other cheek is noble. And while this might maintain social order, it does so at the cost of the individual's strength, authenticity, and will. In contrast, master morality values strength, courage, pride, and self-affirmation. It respects the individual who speaks their truth, even when it's unpopular, who defends their boundaries without apology, who pursues their values without seeking permission. Now, this isn't a license for cruelty. Nietzsche's point was never to encourage meaningless violence or domination. The conflict he spoke of was first and foremost internal, between your instinct for conformity and your instinct for authenticity. And from that inner battle, all outer courage is born. Now, this isn't a license for cruelty. Nietzsche's point was never to encourage meaningless violence or domination. The conflict he spoke of was first and foremost internal, between your instinct for conformity and your instinct for authenticity. And from that inner battle, all outer courage is born. We see this tension everywhere. Take relationships, for example. Most people believe that a healthy relationship is one without conflict, that love means constant agreement. But clinical psychologists know this isn't true. Couples who avoid conflict at all costs are often the most emotionally distant. Resentments build like invisible bricks between them. A marriage might last 50 years without a single fight, and still be lifeless. Conflict, when engaged with consciously, reveals where the edges of two people meet. It sharpens intimacy, clarifies values, and strengthens trust. The absence of conflict isn't peace, it's avoidance. In professional life, it's the same. Employees who never voice dissent, who always play it safe, who keep their heads down, may avoid being disliked, but they also avoid leadership, influence, and respect. Studies in organizational psychology have shown that companies that encourage healthy disagreement outperform those that enforce artificial harmony. Friction, when managed wisely, drives innovation, and yet most of us are trained from childhood to suppress it. To be the nice one, the easygoing one, the one who doesn't cause problems. But here's the cost. The more you suppress your instincts, the more disconnected you become from your own life force. You start to feel numb, directionless, exhausted for no apparent reason. This is what Nietzsche called ressentiment, a suppressed hostility toward one's own denied impulses, which festers beneath the surface and poisons the soul. He warned that societies built on avoidance and pacification inevitably breed mediocrity. Without conflict, without the struggle between competing values, ideas, and personalities, no culture can evolve. No individual can fully individuate. And this brings us to one of Nietzsche's most powerful and unsettling ideas, amor fati, love of fate. To Nietzsche, a person's greatness is measured not by how much peace they preserve, but by how much conflict they can endure and transmute into strength. The truly free person doesn't merely tolerate conflict, they welcome it. They see in every confrontation an opportunity to become more themselves. Imagine how differently you'd live if you saw discomfort not as a threat, but as an initiation. If you stopped flinching every time someone disagreed with you. If you stopped managing other people's reactions like it was your job. If you stopped living as a diplomat and started living as a sovereign. This isn't some abstract philosophical ideal. It's an invitation to claim your life. And it starts, as Nietzsche would say, with the smallest rebellion, telling the truth. First to yourself, then to the world, even if your voice shakes, even if it costs you approval, because that's the price of freedom. It starts small, a moment so subtle you barely notice it. A conversation at a dinner table where someone makes a dismissive remark about something you care about. A colleague steamrolls your idea in a meeting. A friend casually crosses a line you never thought needed to be drawn, and you smile, nod, swallow it, because it's not worth the fight, because I don't want to ruin the mood, because maybe I'm overreacting. But what Nietzsche knew, and what so many modern thinkers later confirmed, is that these tiny, repeated moments of avoidance aren't harmless. They're soul wounds, microscopic fractures in the self that, over time, compromise the entire structure of your being. And this is the unsettling truth. The conflict you avoid doesn't disappear. It moves inward. What you don't express, you repress. And what you repress eventually turns on you. This isn't just philosophical poetry. It's measurable psychology. In modern clinical terms, chronic conflict avoidance leads to suppressed aggression, passive resentment, chronic anxiety, and an eroded sense of identity. Over years, the inability to assert your needs and values creates what Carl Jung called a divided psyche, a split between the face you show the world and the self you silently betray. The world tells you to be agreeable, to compromise, to pick your battles. But here's what it doesn't tell you. When you never pick battles, you lose the war. Not against others, but against yourself. Nietzsche saw this pattern everywhere. In the meekness of his contemporaries. In the way people silenced their instincts to fit into roles assigned by religion, state, and culture. He believed society was designed to tame the human spirit, to turn lions into lambs. And the method was simple. Teach people to fear conflict. Because a person who fears conflict can be controlled. A person who fears disapproval can be manipulated. A person who fears rejection will follow any rule, swallow any lie, and shrink themselves to avoid friction. And that's the foundation of what Nietzsche called herd morality. The unconscious, collective agreement to value peace over truth, comfort over courage, sameness over sovereignty. But what happens to those who cannot conform? To the souls too wild, too honest, too unruly to fake it forever? They become ill, not always in body, but in spirit. Nietzsche wrote,